Across Iran's mountains and plains, there are ancient structures that make you wonder about their true origins. Ziggurats emerge from empty deserts, towering upwards, almost like they're reaching for something beyond time. Cliff-cut tombs sit high above forgotten roads, silent witnesses to long-lost stories. Settlements built with such care and precision, sometimes it feels like they shouldn't belong to the age we think they do. The strange thing is, the pieces don't always seem to fit. Construction stages seem out of sync, and their purpose, still a mystery. The engineering techniques used, sometimes baffling, leave us scratching our heads. So what were these places really for? Why were they built in such a strange way? It's like they're hiding secrets we may never fully understand. Northwest of Persepolis, where pale limestone cliffs rise sharply from the plains of southern Iran, lies one of the most striking historical landscapes of the ancient world, Naksh-e-Rostam. At first glance, the site feels less like a single monument and more like a conversation across centuries carved directly into stone. High above the ground, 4 enormous rock-cut tombs dominate the cliff face. Their facades are shaped like giant crosses cut into the rock, each centered on a doorway leading to a burial chamber deep inside the mountain. From the plain below, these tombs appear almost suspended in the air, like silent ships anchored in the cliff. The most famous of them belongs to Darius I, one of the greatest rulers of the Achaemenid Empire. Nearby lie the tombs of his successors, including Xerxes I, Artaxerxes I, and Darius III. Each tomb follows a similar design. Above the entrance, a carved relief shows the king standing on a platform supported by representatives of the many lands of the empire. Above him, the winged symbol of divine authority hovers in the sky. The message is unmistakable. The king rules not only by political power, but through a cosmic order that unites the empire. Yet, despite their shared design, the tombs are not identical. Subtle differences in carving style and structure suggest that they were created over many decades by different groups of artisans. The monuments may look timeless today, but in reality they evolved gradually, shaped by the practical challenges of carving such massive structures into living rock. And the story of Naksh-e-Rostam does not end with the Achaemenids. Centuries later, during the rise of the Sasanian Empire, new rulers returned to the same cliff. Instead of building elsewhere, they carved their own reliefs directly beneath and beside the ancient tombs. These later images show dramatic scenes of royal victories, coronations, and battles. In some places, the Sasanian carvings carefully avoid the older Achaemenid imagery. In others, they overlap or reshape the earlier surfaces. The result is a remarkable visual palimpsest, nearly 1,000 years of Persian history layered onto the same stone wall. Standing at the base of the cliff, visitors can read this history almost like a timeline. One empire rises, another follows, and each attempts to claim a place within the authority already embedded in the landscape. At the center of the site stands another mysterious structure, Kaaba-e-Zartosht. This tall, cube-shaped building is constructed from massive stone blocks and sits alone in front of the cliff. Its purpose is still debated. Some scholars believe it may have served as a ceremonial fire sanctuary linked to ancient Persian religious traditions. Others suggest it functioned as a royal archive or a symbolic structure connected to burial rituals. Despite decades of research, its exact role remains uncertain. This uncertainty extends to many aspects of the site. Although the tombs clearly belonged to powerful kings, the chambers inside them are surprisingly simple. They are small and austere, lacking the elaborate decoration one might expect from such monumental exteriors. This contrast raises questions about Achaemenid burial practices, which remain poorly documented in surviving texts. Archaeologists have also noted the absence of clear evidence for regular religious ceremonies at the site. This is surprising, given the monumental nature of the complex and its close association with imperial power. Instead, Naksh-e-Rostam appears to have functioned primarily as a symbolic landscape, one that connected royal authority with memory, ancestry, and the permanence of stone. Even today, the cliffs continue to hold unanswered questions. Tool marks reveal the impressive organization of ancient labor, while stylistic details hint at artistic influences traveling across the empire. Yet many aspects of the site's original meaning remain difficult to reconstruct. Perhaps that uncertainty is part of what makes the place so powerful. In the shifting light of the afternoon, the carved figures seem to emerge and fade across the limestone surface. The kings stand frozen in gestures of authority, their images enduring long after the empires that created them disappeared. Over time, wind and erosion have softened the sharp edges of these carvings, but the monumental scale of the site still commands attention. Naksh-i-Rostam is not simply a burial ground, it is a landscape of memory, one where successive civilizations attempted to anchor their power in stone, fully aware that future generations would interpret those messages in their own ways. And as the cliffs continue to weather, the site remains suspended between certainty and mystery, reminding us that even the most carefully crafted monuments cannot fully preserve the intentions of the people who built them.
Across the wide, low plains of Khuzestan, where seasonal rivers shift their courses through silty soil and the horizon stretches under heavy, humid air, an unusual structure rises from the landscape. This is Choga Zanbil, one of the best preserved ziggurats in the ancient Near East. Unlike the soft, irregular mounds formed by centuries of settlement elsewhere in the region, Choga Zanbil stands with striking geometric clarity. Its broad, stepped terraces form the massive core of a monumental ziggurat, an artificial mountain of baked bricks that once dominated the religious and political world of the Elamite civilization. The complex was founded in the 13th century BCE by the Elamite king Untash-Napirisha. His vision was ambitious. Rather than simply building a temple, he created an entire sacred city designed to gather multiple religious traditions into one monumental center. At the heart of the site stood the ziggurat itself, originally rising in several tiers and crowned by a temple dedicated to major Elamite deities. Around it spread a carefully planned complex, temples for different gods, administrative buildings, storage areas, and living quarters for priests and workers. All of this was enclosed within massive walls arranged in concentric rings. The layout suggests a sacred landscape designed to guide movement inward, gradually leading visitors from the outer city toward the spiritual center at the top of the towering structure. Yet, despite the impressive scale of the project, the archaeological evidence hints that the city may never have been fully completed. Some outer structures appear unfinished, while others show signs of modification or abandonment. This has led scholars to wonder whether political changes, economic limitations, or shifts in religious priorities interrupted the king's original plans. Inside the ziggurat itself, traces of multiple construction phases reveal a complex history. Builders repeatedly reinforced or altered sections of the structure, adding new layers of brick and plaster. Many of these bricks bear stamped inscriptions describing the king's dedication of the monument and the gods it honored. These inscriptions offer valuable glimpses into Elamite administration and the organization of large building projects. They tell us who ordered the construction and whom it was meant to honor, but they reveal little about how the sanctuary actually functioned in daily religious life. The surrounding temples raise further questions. Their courtyards, altars, and ritual installations suggest a rich ceremonial culture, yet the precise nature of the rituals performed there remains uncertain. Archaeologists must reconstruct these practices indirectly through pottery fragments, architectural parallels, and traces of offerings found in the soil. The complex was clearly designed with careful control of access. Gates and walls regulated movement into the sacred spaces, suggesting a blend of religious authority and administrative power. In this sense, Choga may have been more than a purely spiritual center. It was also part of a broader political strategy that reinforced the authority of the Elamite state. Still, the site presents a curious contradiction. Given its monumental scale, one might expect it to stand at the center of a major city. Instead, Choga was built at some distance from established urban hubs. This unusual location has led scholars to propose several possibilities. Perhaps it served as a royal pilgrimage site, a ceremonial capital, or an ambitious religious city that never fully achieved the role its founder envisioned. The surrounding landscape adds another layer of complexity. Archaeologists have identified channels and basins that likely helped manage water in the flood-prone plains. These systems appear to have been adapted over time, suggesting that the builders had to continually adjust to the region's changing environmental conditions. As the late Bronze Age came to an end and political power shifted across the region, the importance of Choga gradually declined. The central ziggurat remained standing, but many of the outer buildings fell into disuse. Rather than a sudden abandonment, the archaeological record suggests a slow fading of activity. Religious ceremonies likely became less frequent, and maintenance of the complex gradually diminished. Today, centuries of erosion have softened the sharp edges of the once towering terraces, yet the structure still commands attention across the quiet plain. Choga remains one of the rare places where the architectural vision of the Elamite world can still be seen so clearly. Its inscriptions and ruins reveal much about construction techniques, administration, and religious ideas. And yet the larger questions remain open. Why did a king attempt to unite multiple cults in a single sacred city? How did the rituals performed here shape Elamite identity? And what circumstances prevented the project from fully realizing its original vision? In this sense, the ziggurat stands not only as a monument, but also as a question carved into the landscape, an enduring reminder of how ancient civilizations tried to anchor belief, power, and identity in monumental form, even as time slowly softened the certainty of their intentions. In the bright, dry highlands of southwestern Iran, where the foothills of the Zagros Mountains stretch toward a wide alluvial plain, the ruins of Persepolis rise quietly from the earth. Today, the city stands stripped of the cedar roofs, colorful tiles, and ceremonial banners that once defined it. What remains is stone, terraces, stairways, and towering columns, arranged with a calm precision that still hints at the rhythm of a powerful empire. Even after more than 2,000 years, the site carries an atmosphere of deliberate design, as if every step upward was meant to shape how visitors felt as much as what they saw. At first glance, Persepolis appears to be a grand administrative center of the Achaemenid Empire, the dynasty that ruled a vast territory stretching from Anatolia to the Indus. But the deeper one looks, the more the city feels like something else, a carefully constructed stage where politics, ceremony, and philosophy blended into a single experience. Nowhere is this clearer than at the great platform of the Apadana. Here, long processions of carved figures climb the stone walls, delegations from across the empire bringing gifts to the Persian king. Their clothing, hairstyles, and offerings are rendered with quiet attention to detail. Yet the scenes do not portray conquest or humiliation. Instead, they present a vision of an empire defined by diversity and order, where many cultures appear together within a carefully organized world. Archaeologists have spent decades studying these reliefs, along with thousands of clay tablets discovered at the site. These records reveal a sophisticated administrative system, tracking labor, supplies, and the movement of skilled workers from distant regions of the empire. Stonecutters from Anatolia, craftsmen from Egypt, and artisans from Mesopotamia all contributed to the construction of Persepolis. The city itself was a product of the empire's vast human network. And yet the layout of the site raises questions that straightforward administrative explanations cannot fully answer. Unlike many ancient capitals, Persepolis was not designed for everyday governance. Evidence suggests it was used primarily for ceremonial gatherings, especially during Nowruz, the Persian New Year celebration. Visitors approaching the city would climb broad stairways, pass through monumental gateways such as the Gate of All Nations, and enter open courtyards framed by towering columns. The experience seems to have been carefully choreographed. With each step, the architecture guided the visitor upward and inward, gradually shifting attention from the practical world to something more symbolic. Light and shadow played across the vast halls, creating spaces that felt almost ritualistic.
For this reason, some historians believe Persepolis was designed not just to display imperial power, but to express a deeper idea: the king's role in maintaining order in both the human and cosmic realms. But the story of Persepolis also carries a striking contradiction. In 330 BCE, during his campaign against Persia, Alexander the Great captured the city. Ancient accounts describe a dramatic fire that destroyed much of the complex. For centuries, this moment has been portrayed as the violent end of the Persian imperial capital. Modern archaeology, however, paints a more complicated picture. The physical evidence suggests that the destruction was uneven. Some areas burned heavily, while others remained relatively intact. Layers of ash and collapsed timber indicate a series of events rather than a single catastrophic blaze. The reasons behind the fire, whether political symbolism, revenge, accident, or calculated destruction, are still debated. Interestingly, archaeologists have found little evidence of widespread looting. This suggests that Persepolis may not have been valued primarily for portable wealth, such as gold or treasure. Instead, its true significance lay in its architecture and symbolism, things that could not be carried away, only damaged or erased. When researchers examine Persepolis within its wider landscape, the site becomes even more intriguing. It was not an isolated city, but part of a broader network of roads, water systems, and administrative centers connected to places like Pasargadae and Nakhche-Rostam. Together, these locations formed a complex infrastructure that supported the empire's economy and governance. Even today, despite decades of excavation and research, Persepolis continues to resist complete understanding. What exact experience did visitors have as they passed through its great gateways? How did multilingual inscriptions influence the way authority was perceived across an empire of many languages? Why do some architectural elements echo older Near Eastern traditions, while others appear boldly innovative? These questions remain open. Persepolis stands today between certainty and mystery. Its stone terraces and silent columns reveal much about the ambitions of the empire that built them, yet they also leave space for interpretation. The city still feels like a place designed not only to be seen, but to be experienced, an environment where architecture, ceremony, and symbolism once worked together to express how a civilization understood itself at its height. And long after the festivals ended and the fires died out, those weathered columns continue to watch over the plain, carrying with them a quiet reminder that even the greatest empires leave behind questions as enduring as their monuments.
On the edge of the desert plains near the historic city of Kashan, two quiet earthen mounds rise above the surrounding farmland. At first glance, they appear unremarkable, simple hills shaped by time and wind. Yet these modest rises hold one of the oldest human stories on the Iran plateau. This place is known as Tepe Sialk.
Unlike the grand ruins of later civilizations, Tepe Sialk is not a monument built in a single moment of history. It is something far quieter and far older, a settlement that grew slowly, layer by layer, over thousands of years. The site consists of two mounds, one to the north and one to the south, formed not by deliberate construction, but by centuries of rebuilding homes, workshops, and communal spaces on top of earlier ones. Each generation left traces behind. Mud brick walls collapsed and were replaced. Hearths were rebuilt. Graves were dug into older ground. Over time, these repeated cycles of living and rebuilding created the rising mounds archaeologists see today. Excavations have revealed that people were living here as early as the 6th millennium BCE, making Tepe Sialk one of the oldest known settlements in the region. The layers of earth and debris preserve a long sequence of human activity that reflects the gradual transformation of early farming communities into more complex societies. Archaeologists studying the site move downward through these layers almost like turning the pages of an ancient book. In the upper levels, they find evidence of later Bronze Age settlements, mud brick buildings, organized streets, and burial areas. Deeper still lie earlier Neolithic communities whose houses were simpler, but whose lives were already tied to agriculture, pottery making, and emerging forms of social organization. Pottery from the site has become one of the most important clues to understanding its history. The ceramics found at Tepe Sialk show distinctive painted patterns and evolving techniques that help researchers track cultural changes across centuries. Some designs resemble pottery discovered at distant sites across the Iranian plateau and even parts of Mesopotamia, suggesting that the people living here were connected to wider networks of trade and cultural exchange. Yet, the story the pottery tells is incomplete. Subtle differences in shapes, decorations, and manufacturing methods hint at changes in identity, ritual practice, or daily use that are difficult to interpret today. These variations suggest that the community was not static, but constantly adapting to new influences and circumstances. The southern mound of Tepe Sialk reveals even deeper complexity. Archaeologists have uncovered large mud brick platforms dating to the late 3rd and early 2nd millennia BCE. Some scholars believe these may have supported early temple-like structures, possibly serving ceremonial or communal purposes. But the surviving remains are fragmentary. The foundations are substantial enough to indicate coordinated construction, yet not well preserved enough to clearly reveal how the structures were used. As a result, their exact role, religious, administrative, or social, remains uncertain. Burials discovered throughout the site add another layer to the mystery. Some graves are simple pits containing few objects, while others include carefully arranged pottery, metal tools, ornaments, and other goods placed beside the dead. These differences suggest that social distinctions may have existed within the community. At the same time, the houses uncovered nearby remain relatively modest. This contrast raises an interesting question. How did people at Tepe Sialk express social status in daily life if their homes were so similar in scale? Evidence of early metallurgy also appears at the site. Archaeologists have found copper tools, molds, and traces of smelting activity, indicating that the inhabitants participated in the technological developments spreading across the ancient Near East. Yet the sources of the raw materials and the networks that supplied them are still only partly understood. When researchers compare Tepe Sialk with other archaeological sites across the Zagros Mountains and Mesopotamia, broader patterns begin to emerge: shifts in climate, migrations of peoples, and the gradual spread of new technologies. Still, the long continuity of occupation at Sialk complicates these wider models. The community appears to have adapted to changing circumstances in ways that do not always match the regional patterns seen elsewhere. By the late 2nd millennium BCE, parts of the settlement seem to decline or shift in importance, though the reasons remain uncertain.
Environmental changes, economic transformations, or social developments may all have played a role.
Later periods left only faint traces at the site, including limited material from the Achaemenid Empire and subsequent eras. By then, Tepe Sialk had largely faded from the main currents of political history, becoming part of a quieter rural landscape. And yet, its importance lies precisely in that quiet continuity. Standing on the mounds today, especially in the warm light of late afternoon, the trenches and exposed walls reveal a remarkable depth of time. What appears to be simple soil is actually a compressed record of thousands of years of everyday life, of cooking fires, craft workshops, family homes, and burial traditions. Tepe Sialk does not tell its story through grand monuments or dramatic events. Instead, it preserves something more subtle, the slow and steady evolution of human settlement. Each layer represents people who lived ordinary lives, growing crops, shaping pottery, burying their dead, and gradually developing new skills and traditions. Their names are lost, and their stories can only be partially reconstructed from fragments of pottery, traces of architecture, and variations in soil. In this way, Tepe Sialk remains both an archive and a mystery. Its eroded slopes conceal far more history than has yet been uncovered, while its excavated layers reveal just enough to glimpse the long arc of early human society on the Iranian plateau. And within that balance, between what archaeology can reveal and what time has permanently hidden, the quiet legacy of this ancient settlement continues to endure.
Across the wide plains north of the Polvar River, where open grasslands stretch toward the distant foothills of the Zagros Mountains, the ruins of Pasargadae lie quietly scattered across the landscape. Unlike many ancient capitals that cluster tightly around massive walls or towering temples, Pasargadae feels remarkably open. Its palaces, gardens, and pavilions are spread across the plain as if arranged with careful restraint rather than monumental density. The layout reflects the earliest stage of imperial planning under Cyrus the Great, when the newly emerging Achaemenid Empire was still shaping its identity. At the center of attention stands the tomb traditionally attributed to Cyrus. Rising from the plain on a stepped stone base, the structure is striking in its simplicity. A small gabled chamber sits atop 6 receding tiers of limestone blocks, forming a monument that feels both austere and powerful. Compared with the elaborate ceremonial architecture of later Persian capitals, such as Persepolis, the tomb appears almost understated. Yet from this quiet monument, the wider site begins to reveal itself. The remains of columned halls stretch across the plain, their stone bases marking where elegant palaces once stood. These structures were carefully oriented to frame views of the surrounding landscape. Between them ran channels and terraces that likely shaped one of the earliest examples of the Persian royal garden, the concept that would later evolve into the famous paradisa or paradise garden. Archaeologists believe that these gardens were not simply decorative. They were carefully designed landscapes where water, trees, and open space expressed a vision of harmony and order under royal authority. Despite these insights, Pasargadae remains more difficult to interpret than later Achaemenid centers. Many of its buildings survive only as foundations, and the site contains far fewer inscriptions than the monumental complexes built by later Persian kings. As a result, scholars often rely on indirect clues, masonry styles, pottery fragments, and the spatial relationships between structures to understand how the royal complex functioned. The architecture itself reflects a fascinating blend of cultural influences. The columned halls echo traditions from Mesopotamia and Anatolia, while some structural elements resemble those of Urartian architecture. At the same time, the gardens and open layout suggest innovations that would become distinctly Persian.
In this sense, Pasargadae seems to represent a moment of experimentation. The builders were drawing ideas from across the newly expanding empire while shaping forms that would later become standardized in Persian royal architecture. Another intriguing feature of the site is the large stone platform known as Tal-e-Takht. Rising on a rocky hill at the northern edge of the complex, this massive terrace is supported by carefully constructed limestone retaining walls. Its purpose remains debated. Some scholars believe it served as a fortified citadel, while others suggest it may have been intended as an elevated administrative or ceremonial center. The construction history of Tal e Tacht also hints at changing priorities. The earliest sections are built from finely cut stone blocks, while later additions use rougher masonry, suggesting that the structure may have been modified or expanded over time. Even the tomb of Cyrus, although one of the best preserved monuments at the site, raises intriguing questions. Its stepped base recalls architectural traditions from Anatolia and Urartu, while the small house-like chamber above resembles older Near Eastern funerary forms. What makes it unusual, however, is its solitary placement in the open plain. Rather than being enclosed within a palace complex, the tomb stands apart from the surrounding buildings. This positioning may have been deliberate, an attempt to anchor the memory of the king directly within the landscape he ruled. Excavations around the tomb suggest that it was not always as isolated as it appears today. Archaeologists have found traces of surrounding gardens and what may have been a processional route leading toward the monument. These features hint that the tomb once formed part of a carefully orchestrated ceremonial environment. Still, the rituals associated with the site remain largely unknown. Later classical sources describe reverence for Cyrus's tomb during the Achaemenid period, but the exact ceremonies that took place there are difficult to reconstruct.
Water management systems discovered across the site add another layer to the story. Channels, basins, and terraces show that the builders engineered a sophisticated hydraulic network to supply and shape the royal gardens. Yet the exact sequence of construction remains uncertain, leaving researchers to piece together the system's development through soil studies and comparisons with later Persian landscapes. Pasargade's role within the empire also evolved over time. After the reign of Cyrus, the political center gradually shifted to Persepolis, which became the primary ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid kings. Pasargadae, however, did not disappear. Instead, it continued to function as a place of memory, closely associated with the legacy of Cyrus himself. This shift is visible in the archaeological record. Construction activity slowed, administrative functions moved elsewhere, and the site gradually lost its central political role. Yet it remained symbolically important, particularly because of the royal tomb. Walking through Pasargadae today, the distances between its ruins are striking. Each building stands somewhat apart from the others, yet together they form a coherent landscape. The openness of the site feels intentional, almost philosophical, a vision of imperial power expressed not through crowded monumentality, but through balance, space, and harmony with the land. In this quiet plain, where wind moves steadily across the grass and ancient stone blocks lie scattered under the open sky, Pasargadae reveals itself as something more than an archaeological site. It represents the earliest architectural expression of Persian imperial identity. And yet many of its deeper meanings remain just beyond our reach. How did the builders imagine the relationship between gardens, palaces, and royal memory? To what extent did the design reflect the personal vision of Cyrus rather than a fully developed imperial tradition? And how did this experimental landscape shape the grander architectural achievements that followed? For now, Pasargadae remains a place suspended between clarity and mystery, its surviving stones offering glimpses into the birth of an empire, while the broader intentions behind its design continue to invite thoughtful interpretation. High in the volcanic highlands of northwestern Iran, where dark ridgelines ripple across the landscape like frozen waves of basalt, lies one of the most unusual archaeological sites in the region, Takht-e Soliman. From a distance, the place looks like a fortress.
Thick defensive walls form an oval ring across the plateau, enclosing a cluster of ruins that once belonged to a sacred complex of immense importance. Yet at the center of this enclosure is something unexpected, a perfectly still lake whose deep turquoise waters seem almost unreal against the surrounding stone. This lake is not artificial. It is a natural spring fed by pressurized groundwater rising from deep beneath the earth. The water bubbles quietly upward, filling a basin more than 100 meters deep before spilling outward through underground channels. For centuries, this mysterious pool formed the heart of the sanctuary. Rather than building over the landscape, the architects of Takht Suleiman appear to have built around it. Different civilizations left their mark here, adapting the site to their own beliefs and political ambitions. Early traces suggest activity dating back to the period of the Achaemenid Empire, though the complex reached its greatest prominence during the Sasanian Empire. Under the Sasanians, the site became one of the most important religious centers of the empire. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a large fire temple complex built along the edge of the lake. Thick stone walls and domed chambers once surrounded a sacred fire believed to represent divine purity within the Zoroastrian tradition. The layout of the sanctuary suggests careful planning. Halls, gateways, and courtyards seem to guide movement toward the lake, creating a sense of ritual progression. Visitors may have entered through the outer walls, passed through ceremonial spaces, and eventually reached the sacred heart of the complex, where fire and water existed side by side. Yet the archaeological evidence leaves many questions unanswered. Historical texts speak of royal pilgrimages to the sanctuary, hinting that Persian rulers may have visited the site for important religious ceremonies. But the physical remains do not clearly reveal how these rituals were performed. The buildings show multiple phases of reconstruction, suggesting that the sanctuary was repeatedly repaired, expanded, or modified over centuries. Throughout all these changes, however, the lake itself remained constant. Curiously, the water was not especially useful in practical terms. Its mineral composition makes it unsuitable for drinking or irrigation. This raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps the lake's importance was never about utility at all. Instead, its mysterious depth and constant bubbling may have given it symbolic meaning, a natural phenomenon interpreted as sacred or supernatural by ancient observers. The architecture surrounding it seems to reflect this idea. The complex was not a single fixed monument, but a place that evolved over time. Each generation of builders responded to what already existed, adding new structures while preserving the central spring. Archaeological studies reveal layers of destruction and rebuilding, though the causes remain uncertain. Some damage may have come from warfare, others from earthquakes, or even shifts in religious priorities. Inscriptions are rare, forcing historians to reconstruct the site's history through fragments of architecture and comparison with other Sasanian religious centers. Later still, the site entered a new phase under the Ilkhanate, a Mongol dynasty that ruled Persia in the 13th and 14th centuries. The Ilkhanids built a palace complex within the ancient walls, introducing new architectural styles while reusing parts of the older Sasanian structures. This transformation turned Takht Suleiman into something unusual. A sacred landscape continuously reinterpreted by different cultures over many centuries. Each dynasty left its own architectural imprint, yet none attempted to remove the lake that defined the site. Even today, the spring remains the silent center of the ruins. As evening light settles across the plateau, shadows stretch over collapsed vaults and weathered walls. The lake reflects the sky with quiet indifference, its surface giving no hint of the deep geological forces that sustain it. Standing there, it becomes clear that Takht Suleiman is more than a collection of ruins. It is a landscape shaped by both nature and belief, by volcanic geology as much as by human imagination. And despite decades of archaeological research, some questions remain open. Why did this particular spring inspire such lasting reverence? How did rituals once unfold within buildings that now survive only as foundations? And how did ancient people understand the mysterious forces rising from the earth beneath their feet? For now, the site offers no final answers. Instead, it remains a place where history, geology, and myth meet, an enduring reminder that sacred landscapes often grow slowly over centuries, shaped as much by the mysteries of the natural world as by the intentions of those who build upon it. At the foot of a towering limestone cliff in the Zagros Mountains, the historic site of Behistun rises above one of the ancient routes that once connected Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau. The cliff face is immense, almost theatrical in scale. From a distance, it appears to be simply part of the mountain itself, but as the light shifts across the rock, shapes begin to emerge, figures carved into the stone high above the ground, and with them one of the most important historical texts of the ancient world. This is the Behistun inscription, commissioned in the late 6th century BCE by the Persian king Darius I during the early years of the Achaemenid Empire. Carved directly into the mountain, the relief shows Darius standing triumphantly before a line of defeated rebels. Beneath his foot lies the figure of Gaumata, the man whom Darius claimed had falsely seized the throne. Behind the king stand bound prisoners, leaders of revolts that broke out across the empire during the turbulent years following the death of Cyrus and Cambyses. Alongside the images runs a long inscription written in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Together, these texts recount Darius's version of events, how he defeated the rebels, restored order, and secured his rule over a vast and diverse empire. The placement of the relief, however, raises immediate questions. The entire scene is carved high on the cliff face, far above the reach of anyone standing below. Creating it must have required elaborate scaffolding, though no direct evidence of these structures has survived. Scholars believe teams of craftsmen worked in stages, carefully cutting the relief and carving the long columns of text. But why place such an important message so high above the ground? Some researchers suggest the height helped protect the inscription from damage or alteration. Others believe it was meant to project royal authority into the landscape itself, transforming the mountain into a permanent monument to imperial power. Yet Behistun was already a meaningful place long before Darius arrived. Archaeological evidence shows that people had been passing through this area for centuries. The route beneath the cliff was part of a major corridor linking the great cities of Mesopotamia with the Iranian plateau. Travelers, traders, and armies likely moved through this narrow passage for generations. Natural springs at the base of the mountain provided reliable water, making the site an ideal stopping point along the journey. Even today, a clear pool fed by these springs lies near the cliff, hinting at why the location may have been important long before the Achaemenid inscription was carved. Because of this long history, Behistun gradually became a layered historical landscape. Centuries after Darius, rulers of later empires also chose the cliff as a place to leave their mark. During the Parthian Empire, new reliefs were carved nearby, including images of royal figures such as Mithridates II. Later still, artists of the Sasanian Empire added their own carvings to the same cliff. These additions did not erase the original inscription. Instead, they created a layered visual record, a kind of historical conversation carved into the mountain, where different empires acknowledged the significance of the place while adding their own symbols of power. Despite the richness of the site, many questions remain unanswered. The inscription itself is unusually detailed, yet it presents events entirely from the perspective of Darius. Historians must therefore read it carefully, comparing its claims with other sources to understand what may have been propaganda and what may reflect historical reality. There are also mysteries surrounding the surrounding archaeological remains. Scattered architectural traces near the base of the cliff suggest that some form of settlement or administrative presence once existed here, but the scale and purpose of these structures remain uncertain. Behistun may have been more than just a monument. It might have served as a stopping point for travelers, a symbolic gateway between regions, or even a place where imperial authority was regularly reaffirmed along the empire's vital road network. Technically, the inscription itself is also remarkable. The precision of the carving suggests careful planning and coordination among skilled artisans. Chisel marks indicate multiple stages of work, with different teams shaping the relief and engraving the text. Even so, the exact timeline of the project is still debated. It may have taken years to complete, and some scholars believe the inscription was revised or expanded during Darius's reign. As the afternoon light moves across the cliff, the carved figures gradually soften in shadow. The once sharp outlines of kings and captives blend into the natural textures of the stone. In that moment, Behistun feels less like a single monument and more like a meeting point between history and landscape. It preserves one of the clearest written statements of royal authority from the ancient Near East, yet the mountain around it holds many quieter stories of travelers, earlier settlements, later empires, and centuries of human interaction with this traumatic place. For this reason, Behistun remains both an archive and mystery. Its inscription tells us a great deal about power, rebellion, and empire in the age of Darius, but the broader story of why this particular mountain became such an enduring stage for royal messages still invites reflection, reminding us that even the most explicit monuments rarely reveal their full meaning all at once.